Hi, I'm Wayne and this is Bassador Woodworking. Over the past few months, my friend Kevin and I have been planning a custom guitar build. And over the past couple of weeks, I built this. Now let me show you how I did it.
What's up, man?
Hey, if you were to name a song off the top of your head, what would it be called?
Black Kettle.
Black Pedal?
Black Kettle.
Oh, Black Kettle. Even better. Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
The shape of Kevin's guitar is going to be roughly based on a classic Stratocaster. I transferred the template onto a panel of maple that I will be using for the guitar top. At the bandsaw, I cut close to my line but not on it. I'll get right on the line later using a flush trim bit at the router table, but this is just a rough pass. I attached the template to the maple using some painter's tape and CA glue with an activator. This is my go-to method for applying templates. You apply tape to both surfaces and then put a little bit of CA glue on one of the pieces and spray activator on the other surface. When they meet, they become joined with enough strength to be worked together but separate easily enough that you don't risk snapping something. You can get similar results using carpet tape, but I found that leaves a nasty residue on the surface and I prefer this method. With the template attached to the top, I was able to use a flush trim bit in my homemade router table to get the top down to its final shape. This process can be very intimidating, especially when you're removing a lot of material. The key is to gently feed the wood to the bit, let the tool do the work, always keeping light pressure against the bit and firm pressure on the tabletop. If you keep everything moving, you shouldn't have any burning and you should get a nice clean edge. And never remove your hands from the workpiece when the router is running. The base of the body will be made out of this beautiful piece of mahogany. I followed much the same process as before by cutting it to rough shape on the bandsaw. I am fortunate in that I have two bandsaws. This allows me to keep a nice thin blade on the Craftsman while running a wider blade more suited to thicker material on my upgraded Harbor Freight bandsaw. So essentially I try to get as close as I can and then I'll hit it with I'll put the router template on it and then I'll get it exact. The base is very thick, so I thought it'd be easiest to route this in two passes, one using the handheld router and then swapping to the router table to finish it off. By this time it was getting late, and Marvin, who had been filming for me on day one, was getting ready to leave, so I decided to wrap things up for the day. I worked alone on day 2, so I decided to start the day by thinking through an order of operations for the day. I started by tracing the pickup cavities onto the mahogany body. Okay. This can all be combined and it's going to I'll drill in from here because I'm going to end cap the thing instead. I can round over this back end and then profile that after I have all of this routed. I will route the top, then I'll put the back on, and I will route the cavity for the tremolo on the back. I think that's my best way forward. These cavities did not need to be perfect, so I felt comfortable freehanding these using the plunge base on the router. I made small passes stopping between to make sure the pickups would fit the cavity. This guitar is going to be using a humbucker single coil humbucker arrangement, so I have to expand the bridge and neck pickup cavities to accommodate the larger pickups. I did not route these cavities to their full depth at this time. There will need to be adjustments made after I mount the top to the base, and I figured it would be a good idea to undershoot my depths at this time. I can always take out more, but it'll be infinitely harder to put it back. I then used the same glue and tape process to attach the Tremolo template to the back of the guitar and used a template bit to cut the initial shallow pass. This guitar is entirely custom and I will be making my own trem cover for the back, but I still want it to be mostly correct. Most trem cavities are about 5/8 of an inch deep, so I tried it to at least get close to that. That depth is basically perfect, actually. I cleaned up the cavity with a standard straight bit and was very happy with the results. That's just a hole I will encounter later. I was now at the point where I felt comfortable gluing the top onto the body. I covered the mahogany in a nice even layer of glue and then placed the maple on top. I did my best to fully align one edge of the maple, in this case the bottom, with the mahogany. That way it will only need minimal trimming with the flush trim bit. I used almost all of my 6-inch F-clamps to apply even pressure across the entire top. I used some Long Reach C-clamps and some scraps of plywood to apply pressure to the center of the maple, and I was able to get a really consistent squeeze out that I was happy with. I then set this whole thing aside to fully cure over the course of a week. Day 3 started much like day 2. I was working alone again and continuing to chip away at the body of Kevin's guitar. After a week, the glue had fully cured and I was able to remove the clamps and get the first look at the assembled body. I gave the top a quick sanding with some 150 grit sandpaper. This was to clean up any marks that may have been left behind by the clamps. I then used my flush trim bit to match up the glued maple top with the mahogany body. This also allowed me to quickly eliminate any dried squeeze out that was still hanging around. I'm going to be applying some binding around the edge of the guitar, so I picked up a rabbiting bit from my router and put the largest bearing on the bit. This will create an 1/8 inch rabbet on the guitar, allowing the 2 layers of binding to nest perfectly. The bit was terrifying to use, but it worked really well, and all I had to do is a little bit of cleanup with the chisel. I then routed the neck pocket. This is also typically 5/8 of an inch deep, but I'll fine tune it when I finish building the neck. My template bit often leaves a little brim along the cavity that I need to clean up with a chisel. I then routed the cavities into the maple top. I know what you're thinking, Wayne, couldn't you have skipped routing the mahogany first, and wouldn't it have been easier just to route everything at the same time? And yes, but I'm dumb and I did it this way. At least I can look at the routing the mahogany as a trial run. I then brought the body over to my newly restored drill press to drill out the tremolo cavity. I used the router to clean up the trim cavity by clearing what was left by the drill press with a flush trim bit, adjusting the depth, and repeating the process until I routed down into my table. This was not intentional, but certainly confirmed that I had routed deep enough. I applied binding to the edge using CA glue and a spray activator. I would run glue in the channel about 6 to 10 inches ahead of the binding, and then would give the binding a light spray of the activator, and then firmly press the binding into the channel so that it would bend to the curve of the body. I used strips of masking tape to hold the binding in orientation while the glue set, because even though the activator works very quickly, it is still malleable for a few seconds after applying the activator, and the glue was sometimes set with a gap if things aren't held tightly. After allowing the glue about 10 minutes to fully set, I was able to remove the tape and repeat the entire process for the white binding. The channel that I cut is about 1/8 of an inch deep, and it just so happens that the binding is about 1/16 of an inch wide. So 2 layers of the binding not only give the edge of the body a nice pop, it also fills the channel completely and requires only minor cleanup with a card scraper. With the binding applied around the entire edge, I could trim off the extra using a chisel. And with that, I decided to call an end to day 3 in the shop. The goal for day 4 was to get the body completely shaped and the first coats of finish applied. I began by planing the guitar body to its final width. I started out using the electric hand plane. I really don't use this tool very often, but it's always a lifesaver when I do. The body was sliding around a bit on the workbench, so I clamped a couple of pieces of scrap at an angle so that I can wedge the guitar body in there and it will not go anywhere. With the piece firmly held in place, I could now start taking larger bites with the electric hand plane and really start to make some progress. Having removed the bulk of the material with the electric hand plane, I switched over to a manual plane to smooth out any unevenness left behind. This is a fantastic little Japanese hand plane I picked up on Amazon a couple of years ago. I then rerouted the trim cavity back to its required depth to account for all the material I had just removed. After giving the top a quick sanding, I ran a bead of CA glue along the top edge of the binding. I'll need to scrape this down flush later, but the CA glue will nicely seal the edge of the binding and protect it from future delamination. Next, I ran the body over a round-over bit at the router table. With a roundover put along the entire bottom edge, I could get to work contouring the back of the guitar using a Shinto rasp. I don't have a set goal of what I want the back to look like at this point. I'm just kind of going off of what looks like it'll be comfortable and trying to ease some of the angles I'm seeing, trying to refine some of the curves and to create a more organic shape to the back. I would stop every few minutes and go over the area with some 150 grit sandpaper. This would remove the tool marks and allow me to better see where I needed to continue to remove some more material and where I was good to leave it be. With the back contoured, I could scrape the extra glue from the binding using a card scraper. This part was awful, not because it was difficult or anything, but because it made a terrible sound. With the sides and top scraped and sanded to 220 grit, I cleaned up the body with some mineral spirits before applying 2 coats of boiled linseed oil to the top. The boiled linseed oil will really bring out the grain of the top. After giving the linseed oil some time to set, I put the first layer of clear shellac on the bottom of the guitar and decided to end day 4 there. I wanted to give the boiled linseed oil and the shellac ample time to dry and cure. Throughout the next week, I would come into the shop every day or so and lightly sand the body through increasing grits, 220, 320, 400, and apply a thin coat of shellac to the entire body. I began day 5 by cutting my fretboard from a beautiful piece of Brazilian rosewood I picked up from a local hardwood dealer. Rosewood gets its name from its sweet smell, which smells like roses. because Rosewood. After ripping the fretboard to a little wider than its final dimension, I had to resaw it to just over 1/4 of an inch thick. For thin pieces like this, I prefer to use my table saw for resawing. If you are using a table saw to resaw wood, make sure you're using featherboards, push sticks, and most importantly, a zero clearance insert. That way, the cutoff piece cannot get caught on the insert or fall into the saw, causing kickback. At the radial arm saw, I cut down the fretboard to length. I made a couple of small cuts from the opposite end before cutting it to length because I wanted to preserve some of the figuring on the fretboard that I thought looked nice. And it was time to lay out the frets.
First fret is 1.361. And then fret 2 is 2.646 from the nut.
These measurements need to be precise in order for the guitar's scale to work.
Third is 3.858.
This guitar will have a scale length of 24¼ inches. That is measured from the saddle of the bridge to the nut on the headstock.
This one is 5.003. I can cheat that at 5. This is always terrible to do, but I'm going to use different measures. Let's make sure that these are calibrated to each other. Yes, okay, so these and these are the same. Good to know.
It is best practice to measure all fret locations in relation to the nut, not in relation to the previous fret.
8.065. Did 8.065, now I need to do 8.973.
As I was marking fret locations, I was also scribing a line across the entire fretboard with a square. With all my fret locations marked, I could score my line with a razor blade before using a fretting saw to cut the slots for my frets. The razor helps by severing the wood fibers and creating a very thin curve for my saw to follow. I'll need to recut these slots later, but it's helpful to have the frets cut prior to radiusing the fretboard so that you don't need to scribe a straight line on a curved surface. I have tape on the blade of the saw to mark the final depth I will need to cut to fully seat the fret in the slot. I used the tape and CA glue system once again to secure the fretboard to my bench. I then covered the entire fretboard in pencil lines so that I can quickly identify what areas of the fretboard have been sanded and which have not. I also used 2 pieces of scrap wood as guide rails to keep my 3D printed radius block traveling in a straight line up and down the fretboard. At the radial arm saw, I cross-cut a piece of maple I've been saving for this project. This will be the neck. I then ripped it a little wider than the widest point of the planned headstock at the table saw. This is where the plan for the headstock changed. I originally intended for the headstock to be made from a single piece of maple, but when I was collecting the maple from my hardwood shelf, I saw a perfectly sized scrap of Purple Heart and decided this needed to be part of the neck. So all of a sudden, a one-piece neck became a laminated neck. Building a laminated neck means, well, you need to laminate multiple pieces of wood together. I didn't want to use dowels or anything for alignment because I feared running into them when it came time to shape the neck, so glue and clamps it was. While the neck dried, I drilled a hole through the body for the bridge ground wire. I then drilled a hole for the input jack. This runs directly into the pickup cavity, so I used the hole I drilled earlier as a pilot and slowly expanded until I was ready to drill out the portion for the cable to plug into. For this, I used a Forstner bit to drill out enough clearance for the input jack.
Nice.
I then sanded the body with some quadruple aught or super fine steel wool and applied a few coats of paste finishing wax. This will give the guitar a nice shine, and it will also protect the shellac finish. After applying the wax, I gave it a few minutes to dry until it became cloudy, and then I buffed it with this Ryobi automotive buffer that I have. I then hit it with the steel wool again until the shine was where I wanted it to be. As this is a custom guitar, the odds of getting an off-the-shelf pickguard to fit are minimal, so I made my own. I used a generic Strat pickguard as a starting template, and then altered it to fit the pickups I had and made sure it would properly clear everything that it would have to clear. I cut the pickguard out at the bandsaw. I was not worried about being right on the line for this. I drew my lines with a thick marker, and I would be pulling everything to its final shape at the disc sander anyway. I cut the pickup and control slots with this Ryobi Roto Zip tool. It's made for cutting holes for electrical outlets and drywall. I've used it as a mini router with some success in the past, but this was a terrible application for it. The bit moves way too fast and just melted the plastic instead of cutting it, but lesson learned, I won't use this again for this purpose. I refined the shape of the pickguard at my homemade 10-inch disc sander. I did end up coming back later and shortening the bottom horn of the pickguard. It was just a little too long and it bothered me. I've been using this disc sander for a little over a year now. It's my second revision of this tool and I'm absolutely loving it. This little thing's a beast. I applied some foil tape to the underside of the pickguard. This will shield the guitar against hum. It does need to be grounded to work properly, so I do not remove it from the control pot holes. I instead cut a little slit for the pot to slide through. The pots are grounded, so by virtue of being in direct contact with the pots, so is the foil. With the laminated neck dry, I could plane it down even. I could then lay out the neck using the template I prepared. I traced the neck shape onto the blank using a pencil and then laid out a center line and a start and stop point for the truss rod. This is a short scale guitar, so the neck is a bit shorter than your standard guitar neck. As you can see, the truss rod runs almost the entire length of the neck. I don't know if that's an issue or not. I then set up an aluminum bar as a fence and routed the truss rod cavity. The truss rod is deeper and wider at the adjustment end, so I had to use a chisel to get a nice fit. With the truss rod cavity routed, I no longer needed a square edge and could cut out the neck shape at the bandsaw. Typically I would cut close to the line and then clean up the neck with a template and a flush trim bit, but I don't have a template for this neck. So I got as close to the line as I could and will pull everything into the final line when I'm shaping the back of the neck. To assemble the neck, I first installed the truss rod and covered it in masking tape. I then put on an even coat of Type On 2 wood glue and removed the tape. I want to prevent wood glue from getting into the truss rod cavity if I can help it, so I taped it off and I have 2 alignment pins at the top of the neck so that I will not be repositioning the fretboard a whole lot and therefore not spreading a bunch of glue all over the place. I first used some spring clamps just to hold the fretboard in orientation while I applied more clamping pressure with the F-clamps. And with the fretboard applied to the neck, this is where I left things on day 5. I started day 6 by removing the neck from clamps and heading over to the router table to trim the fretboard down using a flush trim bit. I had to be very careful and trim only a little bit at a time when doing this. I wanted to have the back flat surface of the neck riding on the table because it would add stability over routing with the fretboard face down on its radius. But this meant that the piece I am removing is unsupported and would splinter or otherwise grab if I was not careful. I cut a template of the neck pocket on the body of the guitar and transferred it to the neck. I then used the disc sander to sand to the neck profile. I left the whole neck thicker than I needed it when I laminated it, so it was time to pull the neck joint and headstock into their final widths. For the headstock, this meant removing a bit of material from each side of the head. With the headstock routed to its final thickness, I could drill out the holes in the headstock for the machine heads. I started by drilling an 1/8" pilot hole and then drilled them out to the diameter listed on the tuner package. It's always important to use a backer board when drilling through holes to avoid blowout on the other side of the hole. Pilot holes can help, but sometimes the grain just wants to catch and take the side of the hole with it, so backer boards are a must, especially in something that people are going to see like the headstock of a guitar. With the headstock drilled, it was a good time to recut the frets. My first set of cuts were mostly still there, so I just had to reslot into my previous kerf and saw out the fret to the right depth. Once the frets were recut, I hit the surface with a quick sanding with some 400 grit sandpaper, just to clean it up a little bit before setting the frets. It was time to set the frets. I slotted the fret into the kerf and gave it a stern tap in the center to drive the fret into the slot. I then tap up and down the fret until the entire fret is fully seated. You can do this more accurately with a fret press, but I don't have one, so hammer. With the frets set, I chiseled out the slot for the nut before trimming the ends off of the frets using some diagonal cutters. I then used a pair of end cutters that I ground to a flat to cut the frets flush to the neck of the guitar. I then placed a dot of CA glue on the end of each fret. Capillary action will pull the CA glue into the joint and will lock the fret in place. While that all set, I could start the assembly of the body. I started by installing the bridge. I used a transfer punch to create little divots in the locations for the screws. I then pre-drilled the holes and then ran the bridge screws all the way in. I then followed the same process to install the pickguard. I then installed the tremolo claw. You will struggle to no end to drill these two holes if you do not have an at least 12-inch long 1/8-inch drill bit. It makes a world of difference. I taped a card scraper to the body of the guitar so that I would not risk damaging the finish with the drill bit. I then followed the same pickguard process on the Tremolo cover. I then dressed and beveled the frets. This will make sure that the frets are flush to the neck and that there are no sharp edges to catch yourself on. Next, it was time to level the frets. This can be the most tedious part of the build, but it is also arguably the most important step to making a playable guitar. If the frets are not level, you'll get string buzz, it'll be harder to play, and it'll be harder to intonate. To level the frets, I'm using a straight edge across 3 frets. If the straight edge teeters, the frets are not level, and I mark the high fret with a Sharpie. I then do a leveling pass with a known level beam and check again. I use a file for frets that are more than a little bit out of level. With the frets leveled, I could then install the nut. You want the bottom of the slots in the nut to be level with your first fret. It was time to tackle possibly the most important part of this build, shaping the neck. I say this is the most important because this is where the connection between the player and the guitar happens, so getting it right is paramount. There are a lot of common neck profiles. There is the U shape, the D shape, the C shape, the hard V shape, the medium V shape, the soft V shape, and anything in between or any combination of the shapes going down the neck. Now, I'm by no means an expert on guitar neck shapes, and I'm sure there are people with strong opinions on which shape is best for this or that, but I think it's all down to personal preference. Kevin let me know that he wanted to have the neck profile with a soft V shape, so that's what I'm attempting to do here. I'm using a flat disc sander and my angle grinder to remove material quickly, switching to the Shinto rasp to contour the neck, and as with any other process, I'm occasionally using my random orbit sander and some 150 grit sandpaper to remove tool marks and to just see where I am with the process. After I had the neck close to its final thickness, I marked a line down the center and started working off of that to give myself something close to a hard or a medium V shape. I can then soften that by removing the center line and achieve that soft V profile we're aiming for. Overall, the neck shaping took about 45 minutes, but it's worth taking your time on this portion and making sure you get it right. If you don't take enough material off, it will be blocky and uncomfortable to play. If you take too much, your neck could be weak, or worse yet, you could blow right through the back of the neck and into the cavity for your truss rod.
Yeah, that's nice. It's a little bit.
With the neck shaped, I next drilled a hole in the neck to expose the truss rod. I then went over to my shopsmith where I have a sanding drum installed and used it to sand the taper between the headstock and the nut. I next wiped the entire neck down with mineral spirits to prep it for finishing. To finish the neck, I coated it in multiple light coats of spray shellac. With the neck drying, I pre-drilled the mounting holes in the body. I decided it was time for final assembly. I started by installing the bridge. I could then install the pickguard that I had preloaded with the electronics. The input jack needed to be soldered on, so I tinned each wire with some solder and then attached each lead to its required location. With the input jack attached, I decided it was time to test the wiring to make sure everything was working the way it was designed to. This can be done by tapping a screwdriver on the pickup to see if it's live. There's still some tinkering I need to do to get it exactly the way Kevin wants it, but this is a good start. I could then mount the input jack in its cavity. I then installed the control knobs and secured them with their set screws. I then installed the strap buttons. I then had to ground the bridge. The easiest way to do this was to solder my ground wire to the tremolo claw. I had used a burr in my drill to remove a bit of the protective coating from the metal and then use some soldering flux and lots of heat to solder the ground to the claw. I then installed the tremolo springs. After applying multiple coats of spray shellac, I had to remove any shellac that was present on the frets. I used some steel wool for this. I then applied a coat of paste finishing wax to the entire neck. I could then attach the neck. I clamped the neck in place and pre-drilled the mounting holes. I could then drive some screws through the body and into the neck by hand. I was really closing in on the finish line at this point. I was now able to install the tuners. Kevin picked up these fantastic Grover locking tuners for this guitar. They are by far the nicest tuners I've ever used. All that was left to do was to throw some strings on this thing. I put a set of 10s that I had in the house on the guitar, and this thing is built.
This guitar was a lot of fun to build, and I'm extremely happy with the way that this thing turned out. It still needs a proper setup and an intonation before I hand it off to Kevin, and I suppose it also needs a case, but that's a project for another video. Kevin is a fantastic musician. In fact, he provided the entire soundtrack to this episode. So if you liked what you heard, I'll link to his music down below, but I can't wait to hear what he makes with this thing. Thank you for watching. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to keep up to date with new projects as they are released. We also just launched a whole bunch of new merch at BassadorWoodworking.com. It's a great way to support the channel and also get some cool merch, like this merch t-shirt that has the Bassador logo on the back. But thank you for watching, and until next time.